Okay, so I'm going to be doing a video on building up a rack. This will be a 7-foot rack for an AV system. Went ahead and kind of got everything prepped by getting the rack. This rack comes on a pallet, so got it off the pallet. These here are the side panels and hardware for the rack, so I got those separated out. Had somebody give me a hand getting all that done. Got myself a bit of a workspace set up here. I went ahead and pulled the doors and everything off of the rack. So these doors are the front and back doors. I like to take those off just because it makes it a little easier to work on things while you're getting everything in. So anyway, the first thing that I'm going to be looking at as I'm kind of getting started doing the design on this rack is the rail locations. Just thinking through where I want those rails, because once you get all the gear in, you don't really want to move those. So if I'm going to move them back or forward to make things line up, have enough clearance between where the door is and equipment that might stick out or patch cables that are going to stick out, I may want to move those rails back a little bit to allow myself a little bit of clearance, but I'm going to want to do that now while it's empty. So I may put a few pieces of equipment in and kind of figure out what the depth's going to look like and what all that's going to look like to see if I need to move those rails back. The other thing is my rear rails. I like not to have them too far back. If I have them too far back, then any lines and things that are going between any sort of cable management and the equipment ends up hanging out real far, drooping down. So I like to try to make sure that I've got good spacing for those things. So I'm going to work on that right now, try to get some pieces of equipment out and kind of see where we go from there. Okay, so I got my equipment staged out here. We got just add power, rack transmitters. Here we've got lacing bars for cable management, some patch panels. We like using the Keystone patch panels. I'll show you some of the reasons we like those. You'll see here I've got multiple 48s, 24s, another 24. You'll see the setup that we use for that as we kind of get going here. This switch is just going to be used as just a general data switch. It's got some nice features in it that let you split up in a couple different VLANs and some things that we may take use of if needed. We're using the Netgear AV line of switches. These come recommended by Just Add Power. I used Luxel in the past and had a lot of issues with the Luxel stuff, dropping PoE. They've cost us quite a bit of money, replaced probably 14 to 16 of them. I've got records somewhere showing what we replaced, but so been avoiding those. Cisco's just too expensive. It's not a good bargain for the customer. So we're going to try this Netgear stuff to hopefully be somewhere in the middle and give good quality. Using Wattbox for power control. This is a Just Add Power. This is actually I believe this is their stereo audio. We're going to try something new this time, where we'll basically let them route any video signal straight to the audio processor. So I'm going to get a few of these things unboxed to kind of see how they fit in our rack. Down here I've got shelves. I got some power stuff, some blank panels, things like that. Here I've got all my cables, Keystones, DECA for the DirecTVs to address those over the network for the control system. My warehouse guy's got this stuff all staged out for us, so we're good and ready to go. Makes it real nice to have all those things out and ready. So anyway, next thing we're going to do is get rack gears on the things like the Wattbox, some of the other components that need the rack gears installed. The switches, you can install them forward or backward, so got to get rack gears on the side that we decided to do for those. I haven't used these before, like I said, so it's going to be somewhat of our design step to kind of see how we use those and how we integrate those in the rack. Just see how that goes. That's what we do when we're designing here, is try some stuff. Maybe it doesn't work, maybe we switch it around, maybe we rip it all apart and do it a little bit different because we like it that way. But just figure out what works. So that's what we're going to be working on. Okay, so I've got some equipment unpacked. Got the Wattbox here. Got rack gears out for the switches. Like I said, I haven't used these before, so I kind of have to think through how I want these in the rack. This is technically the back of these switches where all the ports are at. Power's back here too. The front just has some nice clean look in the front. Unfortunately, I think I'm going to be putting this rear facing. I think I'm going to be putting my rack gears on the back side, so this is facing out. I'll explain a little bit more about why I'm choosing to do that. But it's just something that we've learned over the years with customers. Occasionally they'll need to access the ports to cycle PoE, things like that. So being able to do that right off the bat from the front of the switch is kind of the ideal way that we found to do it. We'll see once we get these in. Maybe we'll come up with something new. But for now, I think that's what we're going to try to do. So that does give me a challenge of this power cord. How am I going to route this? What am I going to do with it? I need to get it back to my PDU, some of those things. It will be convenient having a power switch up here. Occasionally we'll need to have customers say, hey, we're having an issue with the whole system, something's going on. Maybe power, sometimes brownouts or things like that can cause just some weird inconsistencies in the system. The easiest thing to do is just reboot it. Having all these switches forward facing will be nice because we can tell, hey, just flip that switch off, go down through each switch, flip them all off, flip them back on, let them reset. That may be the ideal, having that there, but it's just another design challenge that we're gonna have to think about. These Wattbox units, I like these because they actually let us power cycle things remotely and do some things like that. With the switches, having the power on the front may kind of alleviate some of the need for that, but there are other components in the rack that we're going to want to be able to have control over, control system, things like that, where we're going to want to be able to power cycle those units. It's just nice to have the ability to do that without having to talk the customer through pulling a rack out, reaching the back, looking for the right wire, that sort of thing, maybe unintentionally unplugging or knocking something else loose at the same time. So anyway, we're going to get started on this. So a couple ways you can do it with these racks. The way I always kind of used to do it, I may go ahead and do this time. I'm pretty good just because I've done this for years of thinking through in my head how I want the rack set up, what equipment I want where. But a nice way to do it without having to rack all your equipment, screw it all in and say, oh, I don't like that, I want to switch that around, I want to move that. One thing we can do is just lay it down on the ground so that the equipment just rests in there on the rack rails naturally before you actually have to screw anything in. So I may go ahead and do that this time. If you do that, one thing to think about is one of the things that I like to be cognizant of is where I'm putting equipment in the rack. If it's equipment that the customer is going to have to get to on a regular basis and access, I'm not going to want to put it all the way down here in the bottom of the rack where they're going to have to bend over or crouch or whatever to get to that equipment. Things like maybe their input for their auxiliary input, hook up a laptop, something like that. I'm going to want those things right here at kind of working height. If they have the ability to plug in some things, maybe a drawer. We usually try to put a drawer in the rack for manuals. They can even pull it out. Sometimes I see people pull it out and set their laptop on it. Things like that. So we're going to want to keep those things kind of hand height, working height. Things that they're going to need to see and deal with that we're going to ask them questions about, like, hey, is that powered on? Do you see these lights? That sort of thing. If we're troubleshooting, we're going to keep those at head height up in here where they can get to those easily. And this rack's going to be for Buffalo Wild Wings. One of the things that they have is DirecTV boxes. They deal with those quite a bit. For the most part, the control system handles those, and they shouldn't really have to touch them very often, but sometimes they do have to get in them, mess around with them. I like to put those kind of just below the normal working height, so somewhere in here. That way they're easy enough to access. They do have to maybe bend over a little bit, but hopefully they're not doing that very often. But if they need to, it's easy enough to access. If I have the amplifiers, some of the heavier components, battery backups, if they decide to opt for brownout protection, I like to keep those units in the very bottom. A, they're units that they usually don't have to mess with, and B, just kind of keeps that the heavy weight of the rack. Wow. The rack down at the bottom too, to keep these things from getting too top heavy with all the equipment that we do put in these things. One thing I try to be cognizant of going back to the DirecTV boxes is those things put off a lot of heat, and I like to think about where that heat is going. I don't want maybe those units right underneath of my amplifiers or underneath of my network components, things that are going to be more heat sensitive. So I like to be cognizant of that heat and just leave blank space for that heat to get out and get away from the other components, so it's not just heating up and getting even hotter. I don't know if you ever worked with DirecTV boxes, but I can tell you those things, they'll if they're packed in a rack real tight without ventilation, they'll burn you when you go to touch them. So they're hot units. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and kind of think through some of that height. I guess going back to what I was starting to say, as we're thinking through height and things, if I'm going to lay this unit down on the side, I'm not going to be able to see what's in front of me, what's working height, etc. So one thing you can do is either take some mental notes of where that's at, or I'm just going to put a couple pieces of tape on there. Maybe someone here that says this is eye height, this is working height. That way, as I'm kind of arranging my components, and for the video at least, it'll be easy for you guys to see, you know, what height I'm putting things at, and kind of explain that without having to stand it back up to explain those things. So I'm going to put some notes on there, and if you're not sure working on a rack, that might be something you may want to do with yours too. It's just an easy way to, before you lay it down, mark those things. So I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to lay this guy down, and we'll go through some of this equipment as we place it. I got to get some rack gears and things on, so I'm going to go ahead and finish getting all those on, get everything ready to go so we can start staging stuff in the rack, and I can explain kind of how I think through putting items in the rack, where I put items in the rack, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done, and we'll be back. Okay, so I have my switches prepped, got those ready to go. You noticed as I was taking these out that these have serial number, MAC address labels on top of each switch. Once I get those in the rack, speaking from experience, there's probably a good chance that I'm going to need those again, part of stacking setup or something like that. Something's going to ask me, you know, hey, what's the MAC address of this switch? Or if I have a failure, you know, what's the serial number on the switch? We need that to troubleshoot, or we need that, you know, for records. So I know I'm going to need that information again, and the last thing I want to do is get this switch all wired up, have everything good to go, and then have to unrack it or try to pull it out a little ways to see the sticker, try to see the sticker from a weird angle, or take pictures of it inside the rack. So I'm going to go ahead and snap a picture of these. I went ahead and labeled these switch 1, 2, and 3, so that way I know which order I'm going to put them in the rack, and that way when I look at that picture down the road, maybe 2 years from now, if they have some issue or something with a switch and we have to get something swapped out or RMA'd, I can pull up those pictures and I'm going to know, hey, you know, I know which switch I'm dealing with here. Of course, corresponding to that, since those labels are there, I went ahead and on the back of my switches, I labeled them as well, so I can see that, hey, you know, if I look in the rack, I know which one's switch 1, 2, and 3, which order they're in. Maybe you know, maybe somebody says, hey, they install their switches from the top up, and so switch 1 is the bottom instead of the top, how I would do it. That way you know what you're expecting to see is what's matching up. And when you're doing labels, get them on straight. Don't just slap them on there. You know, line them up with the things that are around them, maybe leave a little spacing. But the biggest thing is just getting them straight. It looks professional. If you see crooked labels that are clearly just slapped on, or wrinkles in the label tape, not lined up with the things around them, it looks cheap. So just do the job right. Make it look professional. Take pride in your work. So got the rack all laid down. I don't know if I've showed this yet, but I got it all laid down here. So you can see I've got knee height, hand height, and eye height. So as we start positioning equipment in the rack here, we'll be able to see how it's going to go. So in fact, I guess I could go ahead and start doing that because I've got these switches ready here now. I may pull them back out and do a timeline, but I'll just kind of show you at least. So if I grab one of these guys, drop it in the rack here. I do this one-handed. So you can see now I can set that in the rack. Now I can move it around, I can reposition it, and the rack gears hold it in place. You gotta be careful if they do, you know, angle enough, they could drop out of there. So be careful with them, but kind of let you go ahead and get everything positioned without screwing things in, unscrewing it, screwing it in, unscrewing it, messing around with it. So I can go ahead and get things positioned. So I think I'm gonna try to set up a time lapse here, if I can find something to set my camera on, and do a time lapse of getting this thing built up, or at least getting all the equipment in and doing some positioning stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that set up, and we'll go from there. Okay, so you may have noticed me looking at this in the time lapse. As I was putting these in, I noticed that one of these Netgear switches is apparently bent. From what I can tell, let me line all these up here just so you can see it a little easier. Can you see that? Let me hold it right over top here. So you can see all this other gear lines up nice and flat. And this one, you can see even if I put it nice and flush here, flush, and then there we go. It's probably a good 1/4 of an inch or so that it's bent. And you can see here with this switch, it's touching on this end, touching on this end. And yeah, we've got a gap in the middle there. So not sure if that's going to impact it. I may make this my last switch. That way if I need to get this guy out of here and replace it or RMA it, I can. So I think this was switch 2. Yeah, switch 2. So I'm probably going to make switch 2 and 3, since the third one will be my less critical one. It'll have the least number of devices on it. I may go ahead and do that. I may reach out to them about RMA, but interestingly, this is also the one that, as I previously noted, had this the label that was popping up that I couldn't really figure out why, because I was like, well, it actually looks like it's even on the ends. It doesn't look like it's like short on one end. Couldn't figure out why. Well, yeah, that would be because it's bent. So anyway, thought that was interesting. I wanted to take a moment there and go ahead and mention that. But yeah, I'm gonna get this guy relabeled to switch 3, get this guy relabeled to switch 2, swap these guys around. I can print off some new labels. I find they just don't re-stick very well. But yeah, thought that was interesting, so I figured I'd stop the time lapse there and show you that. So I'm gonna get that done, and then I'm gonna go ahead and get the rest of this stuff in position. I guess I could take this. Yeah, I guess I can take a moment here real quick and kind of talk about, let me see if I can zoom out here a bit, the way I space things. So generally what I'm going to do, let's see if I can move these guys all up here just so we could see a little better. I'll show you how that guy was bent. Let me move these down. You can see how this makes it a lot easier to build up your rack and get things prepped as you're thinking through, because everything just kind of sits there for you. But anyway, what we generally do is we will do, especially on these large installs, we're using 48 port switches, but I'll even do it on 24s and just use half the ports. Obviously we'll relabel these as they say 1 to 24, and on this first one that's accurate, but on all the rest it won't be. But what we will do is I will use a 24 port at the top. I'll use a 48 port between each set of switches. And so basically you'll see this when we get it all together, but all the ports here will loop straight down into these ports. The ports on the bottom will loop straight to these. Ports in this patch panel will loop straight to the top ports here. We'll get my next 48. One additional thing I will mention is with this, I'll have these units be my just dead power units. I'm not going to squish these right up here. I'm actually going to leave a spot, and I don't know if I have, got some blanks over here. I don't know if I have any that are open. Let's go ahead and open one up. So we'll go ahead and see if I can do this one-handed without breaking something. Let's go ahead and get this blank opened up. Slide this guy out. And I'm going to put a blank in there. So I'll have a blank, and then I'll have my next component. So there's 2 reasons I do that. So all these guys will slide up just like that. So there's 2 reasons I do that. The first reason is it gives me a little bit of expansion. Say they want to add another transmitter, or they want to, add or change something. Having a few blanks in between some of your major pieces of equipment gives you a little bit of working room, a little bit of space to add in something different or new. If you need to down the road, even at the top here, you can see I left some space. I'll probably put one of our we've got some real nice branded panels that I'm actually waiting for them to come in. I'll put that here. This top one I'll probably leave blank. I may even scoot this down a little more. We'll see as we kind of get everything in here and see how it's all shaping up and how much room I have. But anyway, the second reason that I like to have, anytime I'm using these patch panels, especially the Keystone style, I like to have at least 2 spaces in between, because getting your hand in there to work on this, let me look here from the back. So getting your hand in here, this isn't too bad. But if I pop this blank out, so let's say I pop this guy out and I slam these guys up here and I say, hey, there we go, I've got my spacing. Well, now getting in here to work is my hand, and I've got pretty small long fingers. I can't even reach halfway down there. Back here, I'm not going to be able to reach a Keystone. So if I got a Keystone, or if I've got a line that goes bad, or maybe I only fill this thing up halfway and I'm needing to snap in a few more as they add some lines in the future, I can't get in there to do it. So now I've got to either pull this out, or I've got to do stuff like that maybe means offline time for them. If I'm just coming in to snap a couple extra lines in, and we're doing it in the evening or something, maybe we're finishing up the morning, they're open for business, I can, we can go ahead, me, my guys, whoever can go ahead, terminate those lines. They can snap those in from back here easy enough, and nothing has to be impacted. Everything can keep moving forward. So that's part of the reason. Again, thinking through those things. Okay, I was getting these switches relabeled. I pulled the old labels off, just left them stuck on here. That way I don't forget which one's which. So I got these guys relabeled. This is now switch 2. This is now switch 3. Redid the labels in the back. I also realized I'm going to need to go back and delete my picture that I had taken with the MAC address and serial number. I'm going to need to pull switch 1 out, retake that picture, so that way I've got a picture that accurately reflects the MAC addresses and serial numbers on these guys. So I make sure I've got the right ones. So I'm going to do that, and then I will probably get the time lapse restarted and start loading up the rest of this rack.